Mornings in that small town were always the same. The air still carried the chill of the night, the aroma of coffee wafted from a simple cafe on the corner, and the sound of wooden doors creaking as people entered. Among the customers who came and went, there was one figure who was almost always present in the same seat, near the large window facing the street. It was John, a man in his mid-30s who was known to be quiet. For others, the cafe was just a place to stop by before work. But for John, the cafe was a kind of escape, a quiet spot amid the hustle and bustle of life. He came every morning with steady steps, ordered black coffee without sugar, then opened the book he always carried with him. No one really knew him there. The baristas only knew his name from the writing on the paper cup. Other customers only glanced at him, thinking he was just a solitary man who liked to read. But behind that silence, John had an emotional sensitivity that few people possessed. He could notice small things that often escaped attention, such as the barista's tired expression, or the quiet conversation of two teenagers in the corner of the room who were trying to hide their heartbreak. He didn't interfere, nor did he comment. He just observed, then stored those impressions in silence. His days passed simply as if time was spinning without change. The house he shared with his wife, Sarah, was not far from the cafe. In the morning, John left alone. At noon, he worked as an administrative employee in a small office. In the evening, he came home, had dinner with Sarah, then rested. His life was like the hands of a clock that never missed a beat. It was calm but also bland. Nevertheless, John never felt that emptiness as a burden. He was accustomed to silence, accustomed to regularity, and found comfort in it. Until one morning, a small incident at the cafe changed everything. As he was sipping his coffee and his eyes were fixed on the pages of his book, the cafe door opened. A strange woman entered with hurried steps, her eyes sharp as if she was looking for someone. Her brown hair was messy, her face pale but courageous. She looked around, then stopped right in front of John's table. Without saying a word, the woman sat down. John looked up, surprised by her sudden appearance. The woman looked straight into John's eyes as if she already knew who he was. There was a strange tension that made the cafe suddenly quiet for John, even though people around them were still talking and glasses were still clinking. The woman introduced herself in a low voice. "My name is Emily." Then, without giving him a chance to respond, she reached into her bag and took out a thick envelope. She placed it on the table with a loud thud that attracted the attention of several customers nearby. John stared at the envelope, then back at Emily's face. There was no smile there, no friendliness. Only a serious gaze that compelled John to pick up the envelope. With a slow motion he opened it. Inside were several photographs. The photos showed a woman with long black hair, whom John immediately recognized as Sarah, his wife. Sarah was sitting in a hotel lobby, her right hand holding the hand of a strange man. Their gaze was so intimate, the smile that should have belonged to John's household was now clearly given to another man. John's chest felt tight, but his face remained calm. Emily, who was watching his reaction, said firmly, "I hired a detective to watch my boyfriend. Turns out I found more than I bargained for. The man in the photo is my boyfriend. And the woman next to him is your wife." Those words fell so heavily as if silencing all sound in the room. John just stared at the photos, not saying a word. Emily waited for a reaction, perhaps anger or disappointment. But John remained silent, only his eyes moving, scanning every detail in the photo as if trying to understand the bitter reality that was now open before him. Emily couldn't stop staring at John, as if she wanted to make sure he was fully aware of what was happening. On the small table, photos were scattered about, presenting an undeniable truth. Sarah, his wife, was smiling at a man who was not him. The smile that had once been so warm at the beginning of their marriage now seemed foreign and piercing. But contrary to Emily's expectations, John didn't get angry. He didn't slam the table, yell, or curse. He just sighed deeply, picked up a photo and stared at it calmly. His fingers trembled slightly, but his gaze remained steady. "Why are you showing me this?" John finally asked in a low voice. Emily sighed, her voice trembling but determined. "Because I think you have a right to know. I could have kept it to myself, but I don't want you to live a lie. I know how painful it is to see the person we love choose someone else." John didn't answer right away. He looked at the photos again, then stacked them neatly on the table. Emily watched him, confused yet admiring the calmness he displayed. She had imagined this meeting would be filled with explosive emotions. But all she got was a piercing silence. The cafe remained normal. The sound of the espresso machine roared in the distance. The laughter of customers was faint, and soft music played. But to John all of that felt distant. All that remained was Emily in front of him and the bitter reality that had just entered his life. Emily spoke again, more softly this time. I know this is shocking to you. I also felt devastated when I first saw those photos. But I've made my decision. I'm leaving him. I think you should know who you've been trusting all this time. John closed his eyes for a moment. There were no tears, no groans. Only a silence that felt heavier than an explosion of anger. In his mind he saw the routine he had shared with Sarah. The bland dinners, the brief conversations that never went deep, the smiles that appeared less and less often. And now it all made sense. The pieces of the puzzle that he had ignored all this time formed a clear picture. Without realizing it, John's hand crumpled the envelope slightly. Emily saw this and leaned forward. Are you okay? She asked cautiously. John opened his eyes and looked at Emily with a deep gaze. I don't know what okay means right now, he replied flatly. Emily was silent. There were no words to answer that question. She could only stare at John, hoping that he would not break down in his own silence. John then stood up, straightening his jacket, which had become wrinkled from sitting too long. He put the photos back in the envelope, then looked at Emily one more time. Thank you, he said briefly. No smile, no goodbye. He just turned and walked out of the cafe. Outside, the morning air felt colder. John walked down the sidewalk with steady steps, even though his chest felt heavy. He didn't run, he didn't stop. He just walked straight ahead like someone who had prepared a plan that could no longer be postponed. Emily watched John's back recede through the cafe window. There was something about this man that was different from most people. She didn't know if it was strength or perhaps a weakness in disguise. But one thing was clear to Emily: John wasn't going to handle this in the usual way. Alright, I'll continue with Chapter 3. The story will continue to flow smoothly, building tension and curiosity, with a reading time of about 3 minutes. Chapter 3. A quiet confrontation. That night, the house felt quieter than usual. Sarah was preparing dinner in the kitchen while John sat in the living room. The chandelier cast a dim yellow light, making the shadows on the wall appear long. The television was on, but the volume was low, serving only as background noise. John stared at the screen without really seeing anything. The envelope Emily had given him that morning lay on the small table next to his chair. Sarah was unaware of its presence. She was busy with the pots and the aroma of the stir-fry. John heard her humming softly as usual, as if she had no big secrets to hide. John waited. He didn't want to rush. He knew there was a right time to reveal this secret. It would be a brief moment, but it would determine the direction of their lives. And he chose tomorrow morning at the cafe where he always found peace. The next morning, the cafe was as usual. The aroma of coffee filled the room, sunlight streaming in through the large windows. John was already sitting in his seat, waiting. This time he didn't bring a book. Only a cup of coffee that was slowly cooling down. When Sarah arrived, she looked surprised. Why did you ask me to meet you here? Don't we usually have breakfast at home? She asked with a slight smile. John looked at his wife calmly. There was no smile on his face. I just wanted us to talk somewhere different, he replied briefly. Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down in front of him. She seemed to be trying to maintain her composure, although a slight nervousness was apparent in the way she clutched her bag. John noticed this detail. He knew Sarah was hiding something. Several minutes passed in silence. John looked at his coffee, then at Sarah. In a calm voice, he mentioned the name of a hotel, a name he had gotten from a photo in an envelope. Sarah's face changed instantly. Her smile faded, her eyes widened, and her breathing faltered. Her hand holding the bag was now trembling slightly. John didn't look away. He wanted to see his wife's every reaction. How did you know the name of that hotel? Sarah's voice trembled, almost inaudible. John didn't answer. He reached into the small bag beside his chair and took out the envelope. He placed it on the table just as Emily had done yesterday. Slowly, he took out the photos and laid them out one by one in front of Sarah. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with her hand and tears began to fall. John, I can explain, she said haltingly. But John remained silent. He just stared at his wife's devastated face, waiting for the words to come out. Sarah looked down, tears dripping onto the table. I made a mistake. I felt trapped. Our life was too quiet, too bland. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I just wanted to feel something different, even if only for a moment. Her words fell one by one, like stones thrown into a bottomless well. John listened but did not react. He did not yell, did not interrupt. He let Sarah cry, let the guilt fill the room. Sarah tried to reach for John's hand, but he pulled it away slowly. Please give me a chance. I'm sorry. I still love you, she said between sobs. But John remained silent. All that could be heard was the clinking of spoons on another table, the sound of the coffee machine, and Sarah's quiet sobs. He sat upright, his face expressionless, but inside his chest, a storm was beginning to rage. Since that meeting at the cafe, John's home has never been the same. The once peaceful evenings now feel filled with an invisible distance. Sarah tries hard to improve the situation. She wakes up earlier, prepares breakfast, and tries to make small talk during dinner. Her smile seems forced, her eyes puffy from crying silently. John just observed. He ate, he worked, he came home as usual. But his heart was no longer in the same place. Every time he saw Sarah, the images of those photos came back to him. Hands holding another man's hands, a smile that should have been his, but was given to a stranger. The images were like stains that could not be removed even after being washed over and over again. Sarah tried various ways. She invited him to watch movies together, talked about vacation plans they had never made, even cooked John's favorite dishes that she hadn't touched in a long time. But all of that felt like a belated charade. John responded with short, emotionless sentences. His smile rarely appeared, his voice became increasingly flat. Sometimes, when night fell and the house was enveloped in silence, Sarah would sit alone in her room. She would cry softly, praying that John would open his heart again. But John would just lie in the living room, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, contemplating a future that now felt foreign. The days passed with increasing tension. To their neighbors they still looked like a normal couple. But behind closed doors, the house was like a cracked ship, slowly sinking even though it still looked intact from the outside. One afternoon John's phone rang. The name that appeared on the screen made him pause for a moment. Emily. He hesitated but finally answered. The voice on the other end sounded calm, although there was an unmistakable note of exhaustion. I just wanted to let you know, Emily said, I've completely ended things with him. I can't be with someone who destroys trust anymore. I thought you should know. John was silent. Emily's voice was like reopening a door he had tried to close tightly. Her words made him realize something. Trust that had been destroyed could never be restored. He stared out the window, watching the evening light creep in. The orange color cast a beautiful but long shadow on the wall. Emily continued in a softer tone. I know this is difficult, but we can't lie to ourselves. This hurt is real. John closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that truth. In the same room, Sarah was preparing dinner, trying to recreate a warmth that had long been lost. But in John's heart, that warmth had died. All that remained was ashes. After that conversation, John became even more certain. He no longer saw his home as a place to return to, but as a foreign space that imprisoned him. Sarah still tried to get closer, but John only took one step back after another. That night, as Sarah sat at the dinner table with a weak smile, John stared at her in silence. Behind that gaze, a decision slowly took shape. It was not a decision born of anger, but one born of long silence. The night was getting late, but John was still sitting in the living room. The television was on without sound, only casting a flickering light on his face. In her room, Sarah had fallen asleep after days of restlessness. The house felt quieter than usual, as if the walls were keeping a heavy secret. John opened the envelope containing the photos once more. He stared at them for a long time, as if hoping the images would change, as if hoping it was all just a bad dream. But reality remained frozen there. Sarah, with the warm smile that once belonged only to him, was now clearly carved out with another man. He closed his eyes, and in the silence, his heart whispered. He could not go back. Not because he did not want to forgive, but because something deeper than forgiveness was lost. The trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage had collapsed, and he knew there was no way to rebuild it. The next morning John got ready early. He packed some clothes into a small suitcase, slipped in his favorite book, and took the jacket that always accompanied him. When Sarah came out of the room, her face was pale. She saw the suitcase, then looked at John with wide eyes. What does this mean, John? Her voice trembled, full of fear. John didn't answer right away. He closed the suitcase, locked it, then looked at Sarah calmly. I can't stay here anymore. Sarah sobbed, approaching him and trying to grab his hand. Don't do this. I've tried to fix everything. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Give me time, give me a chance. John shook his head slowly. It's not about time. It's about something that's already broken. Sarah burst into tears, her body shaking, her hands desperately clutching John's arm. I beg you, don't leave me. I can't live without you. John slowly pulled his arm away, looking at her once more with eyes that were wet but firm. "You'll be okay, Sarah. You just have to learn to stand on your own." He then carried the suitcase out. The door closed with a heavy thud that echoed in the hallway, leaving Sarah sitting on the floor crying alone. Outside, the morning air was bitterly cold, but John felt a strange sense of relief. He walked down the quiet street to the small apartment he had just rented. It wasn't big, in fact it was modest, but he felt freer. There were no photographs, no tears waiting for him. Just himself and the new path he was starting to walk. On his first night in the apartment, John sat on a wooden chair near the window, staring at the flickering city lights. Silence enveloped him, but this time it felt different. It was no longer a prison, but the beginning of a new space he would fill in his own way. Alright, I'll continue to chapter 6. The story continues with an emotional and suspenseful atmosphere, with a reading time of about 3 minutes. Chapter 6. Shadows of Memories. The days in the small apartment passed slowly. John began to form a new routine. In the morning he made his own coffee, sat in a chair by the window, and watched the streets slowly fill with people. There were no more footsteps from Sarah in the kitchen, no clattering of dishes, no brief chats before leaving for work. Only silence accompanied him, but he chose to accept it. Even so, memories often came uninvited. When John turned on the television, he remembered Sarah's habit of always changing the channel without asking. When he set the table for dinner, he remembered Sarah's smile when she successfully cooked his favorite dish. Even when it rained, the smell of wet earth reminded him of the little moments they had shared together. Those memories haunted him, like shadows that followed him and could not be avoided. But John did not fight them. He let the shadows come, then let them go. Slowly he learned that memories cannot be erased but can be accepted as part of himself. At the office, his co-workers began to notice the change. John, who used to be calm, now seemed quieter than usual. He worked neatly, completing his tasks without saying much. No one really knew what he was going through because John never talked about it. He chose to keep the pain to himself, as if words would only make it more real. One night, while he was reading in his apartment, his phone rang again. Emily's name appeared on the screen. John stared at it for a long time, hesitating to answer. But finally he pressed the green button. "John," Emily's voice sounded soft but sincere. "I just want to know, are you okay?" John was silent for a moment before answering, "I'm still learning." Emily took a deep breath on the other end. "I know how it feels. I'm still struggling too. But I think maybe we don't have to go through it alone." The conversation continued in a comfortable silence. There weren't many words, just a sincere presence. Emily didn't force John to talk, nor did she offer excessive sympathy. She was just there, enough to make John feel that he wasn't completely alone. After hanging up the phone, John stared out the window. The street lights flickered, the shadows of the trees swayed in the wind. For the first time since he left home, he felt something different. It was no longer just silence, but a possibility. But in the corner of his mind, Sarah's shadow still lingered. He remembered his wife's regretful gaze, her tears when he left. That shadow had not completely disappeared, as if testing John's strength of heart. That night, before going to sleep, John whispered to himself, "I have to learn to stand on my own, even if that shadow continues to follow me." Several weeks had passed since John settled into his new apartment. His routine was beginning to stabilize, though silence was still a frequent visitor. In the mornings he would walk to the cafe, a place that used to be merely an escape, but now became a place where he found balance. One bright morning, as John sat with his black coffee at a table near the window, the cafe door opened. Footsteps entered, and unexpectedly that figure reappeared. Emily. Her hair was simply styled, her eyes looked calmer, though there was a faint trace of fatigue. She looked around, then her gaze settled on John. There was a brief pause before she stepped closer. John closed his book and waited. Emily sat down in the chair opposite him, a slight smile on her face. "I thought I would find you here," she said softly. John looked at her without any excessive expression. "This place has become my habit," he replied. Emily looked down for a moment, playing with her fingers on the table. "I don't want to bother you. I just feel like we both know what it's like to lose something we believed in." Those words made John fall silent. He sipped his coffee, trying to read the meaning behind Emily's honest voice. There was no dramatization, no demands. Just a simple confession. The cafe was crowded, but at that table the silence felt more meaningful. Emily then continued, "I broke up with him a long time ago. I don't want to go back to the past. I also don't want to just forget. I just want to move forward, even if it's slowly." John looked into her eyes, and for the first time he saw someone who truly understood. Not only understanding the pain but also understanding the silence. Emily didn't try to fill the void with sweet words, she just let the silence speak. Their conversation was brief, about small, light things. About Emily's work, about John's simple routine. There was no discussion of Sarah, no discussion of the man who betrayed Emily. It was as if the two had agreed not to drag the past to that table. When Emily got up to leave, she looked at John and said, "Maybe we can meet again. It doesn't have to be here, it doesn't have to be planned. Just, meet." John nodded slowly. "Maybe," he replied. Emily smiled faintly, then walked out. John watched her back as she walked away, just as he had watched her the first time. But this time there was a different feeling. Not just curiosity but also a possibility that was slowly growing. In the nearly empty coffee cup, John saw his reflection. No longer as hard as stone, but also not as fragile as yesterday. Something was beginning to change, though he couldn't yet name it. Alright, I'll continue with Chapter 8. The story maintains its emotional tone, building tension and anticipation, with a reading time of about 3 minutes. Chapter 8. The remaining wounds. The days after reuniting with Emily felt different for John. He still went through the same routine, waking up early, going to work, then stopping by the cafe. But something had quietly changed within him. His mind was no longer filled only with bitter memories of Sarah. Now, other images appeared, Emily's slight smile, her calm voice, and her honest gaze. Even so, the wounds of the past had not completely healed. When night fell, John often lay awake for a long time. The image of Sarah still haunted him, especially in quiet moments. He remembered his wife's crying face when he left home, her hoarse voice begging him not to go. The memory gripped him, making John ask himself if he was truly free from the past. One afternoon, Sarah contacted him via text message. The words that appeared on the screen were simple but heavy. "Can we meet? Just once." John stared at his phone screen for a long time, his fingers reluctant to type a reply. He knew that meeting Sarah meant reopening the wounds he was trying to close. But he also knew that avoiding her forever would not erase reality. A few days later, they met in the city park. Sarah looked different. Her face was thinner, her eyes were puffy, but she still retained the tenderness that had made John fall in love with her. She looked at John with hope in her eyes, as if there was still a chance to fix everything. "John," Sarah said softly, "I know I destroyed you. I know I was wrong. But I can't stop thinking about you. I want us to get back together. I want to fix everything." John listened without interrupting. The afternoon breeze blew, rustling the leaves of the trees above their heads. He looked at Sarah, trying to figure out if there was any truth in her words, or if it was just guilt talking. "Sarah," John finally said calmly, "I've tried to understand, but every time I look at you, all I see are those photos. Our trust is broken and I can't rebuild it." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks. "I still love you," she said, almost whispering. John looked down for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "Love cannot survive without trust. I have chosen my path." Silence enveloped them. Sarah cried silently while John sat upright, his face expressionless. But deep inside, there was a bitterness he found difficult to explain. He did not hate Sarah, but he also could not go back. As he got up to leave, Sarah tried to hold his wrist. "Is there really no room for me anymore?" she asked desperately. John looked at her once more, his eyes deep and honest. "The past is over, Sarah." He walked away from the garden, leaving Sarah's tears behind on the bench. His steps felt heavy yet resolute. Each step moved him further from the past and closer to something new, even though he didn't know what it was. After the meeting in the park, John felt both relieved and empty. Relieved because he had finally spoken the decision that had been echoing in his heart all this time. Empty because the words he said to Sarah seemed to sever the last thread that bound them together. That night, when he returned to his small apartment, he sat for a long time in a chair by the window, staring at the twinkling city lights. For the first time he felt completely alone, unburdened by the shadows of the past, but also without a clear direction for the future. The following days passed more easily, though they were still quiet. John began to take better care of himself. He exercised in the morning, cooked his own meals, and filled his time reading and writing little notes. Slowly this routine formed a new balance. The wound in his heart had not completely healed, but he began to feel the pulse of life returning. One afternoon while he was reading at a cafe, Emily came back. This time she didn't seem as rushed as the first time, nor as nervous as the previous meeting. There was a calmness in her steps, as if she had made peace with herself. She sat in front of John, a slight smile on her face. I don't know why, said Emily, staring at the coffee cup in her hand, but I find it easier to breathe when I talk to you. John looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Maybe it's because we both know what it feels like to be betrayed. Emily smiled bitterly. Maybe. But I think it's not just that. You don't pretend, John. You just stay silent, but from that silence I feel like you're really listening. Their conversation wasn't long, but there was warmth in between. Unlike the pain that dominated their previous meetings, now there was sincerity that slowly built a bridge between them. In the days that followed, John and Emily began to meet more often. Sometimes at a cafe, sometimes taking a short walk in the park. They talked about simple things from work, books, to the little dreams they had once ignored. There were no sweet promises, no rushed commitments. Just a natural togetherness, as if time had given them a new chance to breathe. Even so, John still felt Sarah's shadow approaching him from time to time. Her tearful gaze, her pleading voice, all of that was still stuck in his mind. But every time he was with Emily, that shadow slowly faded. Not because he had forgotten, but because John began to understand, there are things that must be let go in order for new space to open up. One night, after a long conversation with Emily on a quiet street, John returned home with a different feeling. He looked at his simple apartment and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while, he felt that his future was no longer dark. There was a small, faint yet real light beginning to illuminate his path. Time kept passing and John's relationship with Emily slowly developed. They never rushed, never forced themselves to heal quickly. Each meeting was like a small step leading them toward a brighter future. John began to rediscover the meaning of togetherness. At the cafe, Emily sat with him reading a book without always having to talk. In the park, they walked side by side, enjoying the silence that no longer felt lonely. In Emily, John saw something he had once forgotten, honesty unmasked and the courage to face reality. But the past had not completely gone. One night, Sarah tried to contact him again. The message contained only one sentence. I still love you. John stared at the screen for a long time, then put his phone down without replying. He realized that no words could change reality. What they once had was over. He no longer wanted to look back. The next day, John met Emily at a cafe. They sat at the same table where it all began. Emily looked at John with a warm gaze. You look calmer, she said softly. John nodded. Maybe because I've truly let go. Emily smiled, then held his hand on the table. It was a simple touch, but it meant a lot. John looked at her hand, then looked up at Emily's face. There was something sincere there, something that made his chest feel light. In the days that followed, John became more and more certain of his choice. He continued to live a simple life, but now he was no longer alone. Emily was by his side, not to replace anyone but to walk with him. From the wounds that had once destroyed him, an opportunity was born to build something more honest. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the cafe window, John sat with Emily. They talked lightly about the future, about the little things they wanted to do. There were no big promises, no grandiose plans. Just a simple belief that they wanted to walk together, with honesty as their foundation. John looked out the window watching people pass by. Inside him, he felt something that had been lost for a long time now growing again. Hope. He knew life wouldn't always be easy, that the wounds might still leave their mark. But he also knew that from those wounds, he had found a new beginning. And this time he was no longer alone.